everybody, Evan Nathaniel Grimm here. Today we're going to be talking about the Taurus lunar eclipse happening on November 8th at 3:02 a.m. Pacific time. Before I begin, if you'd like a reading from me, you can do so through the link below. I also have all my social channels down there, my podcast, my subscription service, and also thanks to those of you who are tuning in for my interview with the Leo King. That was an electrifying interview, super fun. We got to talk about all the themes that are happening right now, all the energy shifts. And one of those big shifts is this eclipse cycle. Now, as I'm going through today, you're going to want to track where 16 degrees of Taurus falls in your chart. So what house is it in and what aspects is that making to other planets? Especially for those of you who have 16 degrees in one of the fixed signs. So Scorpio, Taurus, Leo, and Aquarius. And this is a full moon. And with any full moon, we are talking about, illuminating something. Now, usually with a full moon, I talk about, this is, something that we're bringing to fruition, to completion. We're manifesting something. But when it's an eclipse, it's kind of like some of it is out of your control because this is really some type of interjection, a pivot point. It's almost like the channel is just changing suddenly. So with eclipses, as astrologers, we never recommend that you set intentions or you really aim to manifest something specific. Like, definitely don't do that. However, with this video, you can better control and anticipate the themes, right? So you can anticipate those themes and recalibrate and reconfigure your life situations right now to best respond to the eclipse. And what are these eclipses highlighting? So we have to place this in the context of the eclipse cycle. So the eclipse cycle right now is in the Scorpio-Taurus axis. And we had the Scorpio solar eclipse 2 weeks prior to this upcoming lunar eclipse. And that Scorpio solar eclipse is highlighting the south node. Now, the south node is things that we're dialing down, we're lowering the volume on it, and we're reflecting and shedding and releasing. And with Scorpio being about things like depth, obsession, fixation, intensity, extremes, the south node hopefully allowed you on October 25th or in the vicinity of that time to release something that was like toxic, a pattern of behavior that you're sick of, maybe a jealousy streak that you have in a relationship, maybe a grudge that you've been holding against somebody, or even a financial related change. So Venus was conjunct that solar eclipse. And so for a lot of people, it was a referendum on their value systems and how they bring their values into their relationships. Because Venus, even though it's debilitated in Scorpio, there's a lot of power that it can channel. And it's really about digging up these insecurities, these vulnerabilities, these very repressed emotions, and bring them to the surface through our relationships. So it's like if you're stagnant or you're stuck in a relationship that you just feel like you're stuck on something, this was and is the time to bring that up, of like admitting something that you may even feel ashamed of. Like just admitting to your partner, like, why do I just feel jealous. I can't explain why, but I feel jealous when you post stories on social media with somebody else. Like something like that, right? Like Scorpio is all about showing your fears to people, and it starts out as like being very scary because it's hidden, because it's unknown. But when you shine a light on the shadows, you honestly, most of the time, you realize that it's not as bad as you think. So Scorpio, and I can, definitely attest to this as a Scorpio, like when you bring your fears out into the light, it's actually quite healing and cathartic. So this is a very healing moment in a lot of ways to release that tension, to release that repression. And also to think about like how have the most negative experiences in my relationships or in my life, how has that affected my go forward relationships? So like when I've entered into a new partnership or friendship, how am I like bringing those insecurities with me and maybe like unfairly projecting that onto someone who is a completely different person? So again, like maybe if I don't trust my partner going out like clubbing without me, it's like, okay, maybe that's a response mechanism to something that did happen in a past relationship. But you have to like, realize that these are distinct people, of course, but also give that insecurity airtime so that your partner can talk it out with you of like, oh, I hear you on that. Maybe there's something I can do better, or maybe they can comfort you. So that was kind of the solar eclipse, but now we're entering this lunar eclipse phase and we're highlighting the north node. And what is the north node about? That's a little bit more dialing up the volume. It's about, reaching forward, progressing, driving that progress, positive karma, it's growth, it's evolution. And that north node is very close to this full moon and Uranus. And what is Uranus all about? Uranus is all about radical change, radical reinvention. And so again, with these full moons, these lunar eclipses, it's not necessarily always going to be about this manifestation or this illumination or this this bringing something to completion, but it will be an illumination. The full moon is when the light of the moon, is being, hit by the sun in this oppositional kind of aspect. And when it's lit up like this, it really delivers a message to us. And so when it's conjunct Uranus, what has Uranus been about in Taurus? This has been about a reinvention of our value systems. And now we're seeing how we can bring that into our relationships and how we can change our mindsets and make quantum leaps forward or pivot and make pivots that open new doors for us. So I can't talk about the lunar eclipse without talking about that solar eclipse in Scorpio. So it's sort of like an alley-oop, so it's like the Scorpio solar eclipse is throwing the ball, Taurus lunar eclipse is dunking it. And so ideally you want to set yourself up for success on this full moon by having addressed these insecurities, having released these things, having asked these tough questions of like, what am I hiding from myself? And how is that affecting my relationships? How is that affecting my value systems? So there's been a lot of that process, which is really, almost alchemical, right? Like it's almost alchemical because it's almost like you can, when you do release that, you transmute and you catalyze this transformation. And when you get into and sit with that intensity, that's what Scorpio is all about, is sitting with your intensity, staring into the dark without blinking until you finally see something there. And then you realize, oh, that's why, right? That's why I've always, been jealous or whatnot. So anyways, with Uranus, this is opening a new door in response to that thing you've released. And for some of you, you've released some negative emotions. But for others, you may have released a relationship. Especially Scorpio and Taurus risings, to be honest. Those two rising signs are in sort of the hot seat with their relationship life. But for everybody, there was and is some type of thing that you have to drain and detoxify here. And so on this full moon, it's all of a sudden awakening you to, okay, now that I've released that, what can I make space for? What can I make space for? And Uranus is saying, okay, I can make space for these it kind of rejuvenating or exciting or electric or sudden, new opportunities. Uranus is unpredictable. It is random. So I don't always conceive of Uranus as like a positive planet. But if you're ready for it, right? So if you're ready for that change, you've acknowledged that restlessness, you've released the things that have been stifling you, then Uranus can be a key to freedom, a key to liberation, and a key to kind of this upgrade of your sort of programming, right? And Uranus deals with energy. So maybe on the lunar eclipse, you're starting to see these new interconnected possibilities in your life of how you can connect all these things and create maybe a new career out of it, because Venus can be our income and our talents, and how do we deploy those talents? Well, my point here is that with Scorpio, if you fall into these, if you become so fixated and so obsessed with like maybe, compulsive shopping or, compulsively thinking about your partner or talking about your partner or obsessing over something else completely different, if you get too sucked into that, then you're not going to notice this Uranian opportunity to, again, electrify your life and to really put yourself on a fast track to progress and evolution. And, again, kind of seeing the world in a non-dualistic framework, honestly, because that's what Uranus can do for you, is get you out of these dualities of like, I don't care anymore about us versus them, or I don't care about, again, like my partner bringing up this particular insecurity. It's like Uranus is just getting you above that fray. So it can be a very exciting lunar eclipse. However, I do want to add that Saturn is squaring all this energy. So Saturn is the planet of limits, concentration, effort, responsibility. So Uranus is opposing Venus and Mercury and the Sun. So that does speak to new mindsets, paradigm shifts, new value systems, new relationships, sudden relationships. But with that Saturn at the midpoint of that opposition in the T-square, Saturn is saying, okay, I'm going to ask you to, as you're making these changes, own up to those changes and commit to those changes and make sure that they're long lasting. So Saturn speaks to a durability that I actually think can be beneficial here. So it's like the changes you're making now could actually lead to something 5, 10, 15 years down the road. So it is actually a pretty monumental eclipse in that way. However, Saturn is squaring as well the Venus and Mercury placements by definition here in the T-square, which means that, again, some people may be ending relationships or ending certain careers to make space for that quantum leap. So it's kind of a bittersweet lunar eclipse. By no means is it a walk in the park, even if you make space for that change, right? So think about the composite definition of Uranus and Saturn. What is the composite definition of those two planets? Sustainable progress. That's how I define it. So Uranus is giving you these keys to progress, to change, but Saturn is saying make it sustainable, make it long lasting. So that's really what you're after. That's the crux to me of this lunar eclipse. And again, Venus. So Venus is the chart ruler, Venus is the ruler of the full moon since it's in Taurus. Now Venus in Scorpio, this can deal with the financial sector, things like that. And so I think about the fact that interest rates just increased again. The Fed increased the rates by I don't remember how many basis points. I think it was like 75 basis points. But that also will have an effect on the economy. And so people are experiencing these recalibrations financially of like, where do I want to put my money in response to some shaky financial situations. We're definitely looking at the possibility of a downturn. So a lot of people are thinking about how do I take more ownership of my finances here along the way. And I want to factor that into all this change that's going on. So I've been talking about this the whole time of like, how can you open these doors to change and to paradigm shifts in your life and seismic shifts? But like, how can you do that if you're worried about, your next paycheck? And so I'm empathetic to that, right? Like, this is not necessarily the time to throw everything away and take a massive risk, because that's what Saturn's all about in the middle, is saying like, okay, we need to take more. I need to take more responsibility. I need to pull back. And square Venus, Saturn square Venus means I am becoming more conservative about how much money I spend. But opposing Uranus, that's saying I'm going to throw a sudden wrench in the system for you. Maybe in your job or in the marketplace in general, in the stock market, in corporate earnings. Whatever is there is a destabilizing effect that might cause people to pull back and become more pessimistic and realistic about their finances with that Saturn square Venus. So all these themes, you're probably asking like, well, how do I reconcile all of that? And the honest answer is you kind of have to be comfortable with ambiguity and maybe a little bit of patience. So maybe the best way to use this lunar eclipse is to at least get clear on like mentally here, like where you're trying to go with your life. Get clear on your goals. But don't expect it to happen overnight, because the financial picture here does look a little bit tricky and complicated. So, this, with Saturn here, it's actually a great time to organize and set goals. So set that 1 year, 5 year, 10-year plan. The dispositor of Venus here in Scorpio is Pluto in Capricorn. So this could create some financial entanglements at the institutional level. So again, I see corporate earnings maybe missing the mark with a lot of big companies. And with recessions, we always see the effect more with corporate earnings first, and then eventually it hits Main Street. So again, people are trying to calibrate all of that. Now, another facet of this eclipse is that Mars is retrograde, squaring Neptune and Jupiter. And that adds like another sort of even more challenging dynamic, which is that a lot of the messaging, the communication, the information you're receiving is somewhat deceptive. You have to do a double take on that. It doesn't mean that everything's false, but it does mean you have to be extra discerning and audit the information you receive very carefully. And with Mars retrograde, we're retracing our steps, specifically the steps we've made since August 20th. And you have to be more strategic right now about how much energy you put into something and into what. So right now, it's just as important as to what you say no to as what you say yes to. So just kind of let that thought sit with you. I think that's the best way to think about Mars retrograde. And then finally, we have the U.S. midterms. We have the U.S. midterms around this time. The U.S. midterms, of course, they're on the eclipse here. So there's a big change that's occurring in the U.S. political system, and I think the markets will react to that. And if I'm predicting the political outcomes of this midterm, with Uranus opposing the Mercury-Venus Scorpio energy, people want change. People want radical reinvention. People are going to crave these sort of maverick candidates, and oftentimes too like younger candidates who have new ideas. Like people want an influx of like fresh ideas, and people with new ideas about how to calibrate society. So again, I think a lot of young candidates and outsiders will win. But squaring Saturn also means that we're going to come to realize maybe some of these people don't even have like the best ideas for the future in terms of, again, sustainable progress. Maybe they just want change at all costs, but they don't actually have a plan in place. And so I think that's going to spook the markets. Saturn square Venus, Uranus opposing Venus. It just looks like value, like literally value on the market is all of a sudden like oscillating wildly and unpredictably. So you'll have days after the election where the markets go way down, and then way up in response to not only the election, but the interest rate fluctuations, new reports about home building and home sales. So there's a lot happening here, right? Like, it's a very complicated picture financially and politically. But I think that this is certainly a day in which the U.S. Looks vastly different, because Uranus opposing Venus represents a new value system. So it's almost like the votes that are cast reflect a new paradigm shift in what Americans value in what they want to see in their society. And then, of course, we can't forget like the powers that be and the executives and the authorities. So we think about, like, for example, Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a Scorpio. He has the South Node really on his Mars. So I think that it's not exact. So Joe Biden has it on, I'm just looking this up super quickly, but it looks like, Biden on this around this time here, he's going to have the South Node, within a degree of his Mars placement. So that is sort of like dialing down some of the energy. We also have, he has that Taurus moon at 0 degrees. So, the eclipse will be a little bit off of that, but, he still has Uranus in his 6th house of health, which he's had there for a few months. And then all that Scorpio stuff is in his 12th house, which is very hidden. So this could be about secrets coming to light, and things of that nature. But I really see for him also like late December time frame being difficult, like December 27th, 28th. Both him and Kamala Harris have a lot of very challenging transits coming up around that time. But even on this eclipse, you're looking at, there could be some type of implication here of a leadership shakeup, or even just some news coming out about, maybe even like his mental state. So even that will be implicated here. But anyways, so to kind of summarize this eclipse, what you can do, step one, look at the house where Taurus is, because that's where you can make this radical reinvention and radically reinvent the direction of your life. And also, calibrate that with the house that Scorpio is in. So if you have Scorpio in the 5th and Taurus in the 11th, this actually might be a new creative process that suddenly alters your following on social media, for example. Or if it's in the 4th and 10th, it could be about releasing an obligation to, a certain family situation that opens up a new career opportunity. So there's a lot of there are a lot of seismic shifts going on. But I think it's really important to know that you really do have to release the tension points in your life before you can even open those doors with Uranus there and see into the future and want to drive forward. But then again, never forget the fact that Saturn is squaring both of these energies in Aquarius, which is telling you you have to take responsibility for those changes. You have to take ownership. And maybe, by the way, through changing those value systems, you can master a new skill set with Saturn, because like Saturn really is allowing you to master something and manifest something into the future. So anyways, just kind of sit with that intensity right now, but it can be released, thankfully, because the South is in Scorpio. So again, thank you so much. If you want a reading, again, the links are below, and look out for future videos. So please subscribe and like this video, and take care.